Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel, Queen Bee SP, for another episode and chapter of my book, Scientology Abuse at the Top. The last chapter we did was chapter 9, Up and Down the Totem Pole, which was a real roller coaster ride. uh, I hope anyone who got a headache from that last chapter is all recovered now. Well, this chapter is chapter 10, and it talks about the abuse that I witnessed, physical violence. So, again, not a fun subject, but let's go through it because it needs to be made known that David Miscavige physically beats his staff. So let's go ahead and start. All right. Chapter 10, Assault and Battery. Article 5 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, "No one shall be subjected to torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment." I think all Scientologists need to know that there is a Universal Declaration of Human Rights and what it says, particularly this one, for the people who are at the Int Base and who witness David Miscavige beating people quite frequently. While the Church of Scientology claims to be a major crusader of human rights, the head of the church, David Miscavige, has engaged in vicious physical violence, beating junior staff members on a number of occasions. Realize also that what I'm writing about here are just the ones that I personally witnessed, because I've heard of many others, numerous others that I didn't write in here. It only includes what I know myself. And I did that specifically because of how litigious Scientology is. Miscavige was always very verbally abusive, but I witnessed several instances of physical abuse, which were simply vicious acts of violence. I am ashamed that I did not have enough courage at the time to inform the authorities or call the police, which would have been the logical thing to do. I also had no ability to do that, by the way. We had no phones. And if you picked up an internal line, it routed to reception, and you're going to tell reception, hey, call the police. They don't do that. They give it to security, and security has a drill, So it's all the whole orientation of Scientology, particularly when you get up to the higher levels like that up in the international management headquarters, is to contain everything within our own premises. You don't let flaps or bad news or any noise or internal laundry outside of that property. So it actually did not cross my mind that I had the ability to call the police. My mindset at the time was, we handle our own, and it would be a bigger crime to do anything to create repercussions for the church. I was also afraid I'd be subjected to my own handling if I attempted to step in. I had seen what happens to anyone going against the church in order to annihilate their credibility. I had studied writings from L. Ron Hubbard about how Scientology's enemies will become cinders in a future life if they even make it that far. It's true. As stupid as that sounds. You don't want to bring harm to what you think is the only salvation for mankind. Instead, you think that any internal trouble can simply be endured and it will all come out all right in the end. I told myself that so many times throughout all of my years. So, like the rest of the executives witnessing these acts, I stood by in silence and watched Miscavige brutalize my peers. Ray Midoff was the Senior Case Supervisor International, which is the highest technical position within the Church of Scientology. Ray was the last person to deliver Scientology counseling to L. Ron Hubbard before his passing in 1986. Ray was a well-known and respected terminal. Now, realize I say terminal all the time when I'm referring to a person because that's what we called people in Scientology, so I'm sorry for that. Ray was a well-known and respected terminal person within the church cult. He spoke at many events, worked to get LRH's technology compiled and issued for everyone's use, and along with the many staff posted in his office, Ray was responsible for seeing to the correct application of LRH technology around the world. Ray was the first person I ever witnessed David Miscavige physically attack. During 1995, Ray was rarely at the Int Base. From my understanding, he was personally attending to the counseling of Tom Cruise at the time. One day, several other executives and I were called up to David Miscavige's conference room. When we arrived, he had already been meeting with Ray Midoff, and I could see that Miscavige was furious. I'll include a photograph here of David Miscavige's conference room that we met in. You can see how ominous it looks. In a rage, Miscavige took off his own name tag and broke it, saying he was going to quit. He kicked a chair into Ray, who was sitting at attention at the conference room table. Miscavige then proceeded to hit Ray on the head with an open hand at least 3 times. I think he had him sitting at attention instead of standing at attention because Ray Midoff is tall and David Miscavige is so short that if he's going to beat somebody, he wants them seated so that he could do a proper job, I guess, so he could reach his head. Anyway, it's disgusting. He couldn't fight back. Miscavige took cash out of his wallet, throwing dollar bills on the table in front of Ray, saying, "Here, take it." I guess to give him money for the physical violence, which Ray did not accept. Miscavige then continued to yell, knocking furniture around in his office, saying he couldn't take it anymore. Without being told what Ray had done, Miscavige ordered us to go handle him. We all raced off to the CMO Int conference room, that would be the Commodore's Messenger Org International conference room, asking Ray what the hell was going on with him. He sat there silently. Shortly thereafter, Ray was taken away and assigned to the Rehabilitation Project Force by Miscavige, where he would spend the next several years. While I was doing manual labor near the swamp in 1996, I saw that a large bamboo fence had been erected about 100 yards from a house in the area called the Old Gilman House, OGH. The fence was about 8 feet tall, and there was a small trailer sitting behind it. I discovered that this is where Mark Yeager had been sent when he was removed as COCMO Int WTC chairman. He was alone there, sentenced to solitary confinement and under security watch 24/7. Gary Jackson Moorhead was the security chief for the Int Base at that time. He has since left the church and has spoken out against the abuse he witnessed during his tenure. As a lot of you know, he has his own channel on YouTube, and I'll put the link down below. Gary said his security guards were on a 24-hour watch of Yeager during his 1995-1996 time period before Yeager was eventually sent to the RPF. The security guards were briefed that Yeager was to call anyone he came into contact with, "Sir," including any stray dog that roamed the area. Gary also witnessed Miscavige's routine visits, where he would violently assault Yeager by delivering repeated blows to his abdomen, knocking the wind out of Yeager and making him gasp for air. Gary Moorhead's video testimony to the St. Petersburg Times of 2 August 2009 can be found at the tampabay.com/Scientology website. In the early 2000s, the physical beatings dished out by David Miscavige seemed to escalate. One of the most serious attacks I observed was in early 2001 on Mike Rinder. Mike was WTC OSA, which is the Watchdog Committee member over the Office of Special Affairs. And our desks were about 15 feet apart in an open office floor plan. Miscavige was frequently mad at Rinder and mocked him and belittled him often. He even had a ventriloquist doll made up to look exactly like Rinder, and another for the president of the Church of Scientology International, Heber Jentz, who was also commonly on his shit list. Miscavige pretended to make the doll say idiot things, as if Rinda were saying it, as yet another way to humiliate these men. One day I heard Miscavige storm up the hallway, and he headed straight for Mike Rinder's office space. With no warning, he came up behind Rinder, grabbed him around the neck, and strangled him to the point where Rinder's face was turning colors as he couldn't breathe. Miscavige hit Rinder on the top of his head, then tipped over the chair, knocking him to the ground. I have no idea why he did this. When he was done roughing up Mike, Miscavige left the office, and that was the last anyone heard about this incident. Mid-2001, Miscavige held a meeting in the WDC space with marketing staff. Jeff Hawkins was sitting about 5 feet from my desk at the conference room table. Jeff Hawkins is now also out of Scientology, which is wonderful. During the meeting, Miscavige jumped up onto and across the table and landed on Jeff, knocking his chair backwards. He started shaking Jeff and wrestling with him on the ground, tearing buttons off his shirt. I collected up the buttons and the change that fell out of Jeff's pockets during this episode and returned them to Jeff, who appeared highly shaken up by the incident. Just prior to Miscavige lunging at Hawkins, he said, "Look at how Jeff is looking at me." Other people in the meeting didn't know what Miscavige meant, but next thing we knew, Miscavige had Hawkins on the ground for his face crime. Yeah. You never knew with this guy. He's just, 1 second you're talking to him or you're explaining something, the next second you're being choked and you're on the ground. It's ridiculous. Around that same period, Mark Yeager was attacked in the WDC conference room. Miscavige ran across the room at him and shoved him into a speaker system. Mark fell to the ground as Miscavige kept coming at him, grabbing and shoving him in a violent manner. Shelley Miscavige yelled, "Dave," in an attempt to get him to chill out, but he kept attacking him until Mark was lying on the ground, looking up like, "Please stop." Once in early 2003, Mark came back to his office with cuts all over his face and the top of his head. I asked him what happened, and he said he fell into bushes. His communicator, her name was Eddie, told me she was there, and what actually happened was that Miscavige threw Mark into the bushes. Another time, Mark came into the dining hall with crutches and a cast on his foot. I asked him what happened, and Mark told me that he broke his ankle falling, quote unquote, off a 10-foot wall by the Cine Studio side entrance. I could tell from the look on his face that that's not what really happened, just what he was supposed to say. Someone who witnessed what actually occurred told me that a woman from the cinematography division in Gold was ordered by Miscavige to run Yeager down with the vehicle she was driving. She complied by racing after Mark, who was on foot, and to get out of the way of being hit, he jumped over a big drop-off and broke his ankle on landing. This was late June 2003. A good friend of mine named Sarah was once poked so hard in the middle of the forehead by Miscavige that she was knocked back, banging her head against the corner of a wall. This left a bump on her head and a large red mark on her forehead. Wendell Reynolds, then International Reserves Director in CMO Int, described to me how Miscavige repeatedly punched him in the stomach about 20 times. He had kept his stomach tense so he could take it. But then Miscavige turned away and Wendell relaxed his stomach, at which point Miscavige spun around and slugged him again, knocking the wind out of Wendell, who wasn't prepared for the punch. In 2003, in the WDC conference room, I witnessed Miscavige jump across the conference table and knock Wendell over backwards next to the desk I was sitting at. Wendell laid there on the ground, and Miscavige told him to get up and stop pretending to be hurt. There were at least 10 others that witnessed this. I know there are many, many other instances of physical abuse, and detailed accounts of these have been relayed to me And fortunately, several of the victims have now come forward to make the information known to hopefully help bring an end to Miscavige's career as the sadistic head of the church, quote unquote, of Scientology. Accounts of these abuses can be found online at tampabay.com/Scientology under the Truth Rundown series, where former Int Base Sea Org members provide details of what they personally witnessed to the St. Petersburg Times. Yes, that's called the Truth Rundown, and I'll show you what that looks like. Well, that was a fun chapter. Oh, brother, let's see what it is that's coming up next. We're gonna see what chapter 11 is. Chapter 11 is gonna be Miscavige Spins Lisa McPherson's Tragedy. Oh, yeah. His hands were dirty on that. His hands were dirty. Lisa McPherson died in the confines of the Flag Land Base, and David Miscavige was involved, and you'll find out exactly how and how he spins it, because it's really, really, really creepy. So there you go for another chapter of my book, Scientology Abuse at the Top. If you would like to buy a copy of my book, go to my website, which is scobee-publishing.com. In fact, I can put it up here. Order Abuse at the Top at scobee-publishing.com. And then subscribe to my channel at Queen Bee SP if you haven't already, and give this video a like. You can also become a member of my channel, not just a subscriber. So there's a link at the top of my YouTube page where you can do that. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye for now.